Today we are looking at 15 GPS watches to see how each compares when open water swimming. And we'll see just how accurate each of these watches are at tracking open water swims by looking at total distance traveled, as well as the actual GPS tracks themselves. And then finally, I'm gonna give my own personal rankings of the entire list. And I definitely wanna be respectful of your time. So, as much as it hurts me, I'll put a timestamp somewhere around here so that if you want to and completely crush my feelings, you can jump to my, 2022 best open water swim rankings section of this video. Now, one of the most important parts about this video is actually understanding how I'm testing and comparing these watches because with any of this stuff, there is a ton of room for errors here. So for each watch, I'm swimming the exact same 1,000-meter route around the buoys that I put out at 100 meters, 300 meters, and 500 meters mark, and then around and back the same way, back to the shore, switching out watches, and then doing it all over again. Now, no matter what, no swim, even if you think you're swimming the same route, is gonna be the same, which makes, comparing GPS tracks difficult. But what I did to control for that is actually have a controlled GPS watch. And I'm using, a watch with a multi-band GPS tracker, meaning it connects to multiple satellites. I'm taking that watch and I'm attaching it to a swim buoy that I'm pulling behind me, where the watch can actually sit up and above the water. So, all of these tests were done in open water swimming modes, all of them for each brand. Some brands will actually use a different smoothing algorithm for multi-sport or triathlon modes. But again, all of these were set in open water swimming modes. And as we get into those rankings, I'd still say that that's somewhat subjective. I am looking at distances and GPS tracks and things like that. But I don't think it's fair to say that, just because a distance matches, that it's an accurate open water swimming tracking device. You could have, one turn that goes really short and another one that goes really long, and you could end up with the perfect distance. So looking at the numbers, they may look good, but that's where really using the control device to track and see where the watches are struggling tends to be a little bit better in my opinion. But generally speaking, the reason that these GPS watches struggle in open water is because, as you swim, your arm is constantly dipping in and out of the water, potentially losing signal just depending on how strong the GPS signal is and actually how deep your arm goes with your swim stroke below the surface of the water. And that's why, a control device sitting on top of the water tends to be a good option. And obviously, these are my own personal results. Your results are gonna vary, okay? I often wonder if, even minor differences in the manufacturing process between these watches might be causing some issues, even something little like manufacturing tolerances around the GPS antenna. That's stuff that I think could probably cause problems here. And each of these watches was worn for, at least 1,000 meters. If I did start to notice issues, or I saw problems, I definitely retested these watches, a lot of times 2 or 3 times. So, doing this project over the past few weeks or months, I did actually end up getting a decent amount of swimming in. And you would think that I'd be better at open water swimming after all of that, but you would be wrong. I did my basic freestyle for all of these loops. I don't think my freestyle is too weird or anything like that, but no butterfly, no breaststroke, no backstroke or anything crazy like that. I am also, not really basing my ranking judgments on, any sort of heart rate data. Swimming is very difficult to get heart rate data correct from a wrist-based optical heart rate monitor. If you really do want good heart rate data while swimming, I highly recommend using a chest strap that can actually store the data on the device. So that's, devices like a Polar H10 or a Garmin HRM Pro or their Garmin Swim app, if that one tends to be a little bit more resistant to chlorine. But onto the rankings. And at the bottom of my list, and maybe a surprise to everyone, is the Garmin Forerunner 945. And this might be due to some sort of repeated error or issue with my particular unit, not yours. but it seems to me that it's always overshooting the distances by a significant margin here. Now keep in mind that, any watches that I had issues with were tested multiple times, and this watch is probably one that I've swam with the most out of all of these watches, and it consistently struggles with overestimating the distances that I swim. I typically use this GPS watch in its systems data recording smart mode, but I also changed that to record once per second. And my results were actually worse. At this point, showing over 300 meters long for a 1,000-meter swim. Really kind of the worst results that I had of all of my testing. I'll definitely continue to try a few different things with this watch, and I'll definitely update you guys in the comment section if I figure out, what the problem is with this one. Next on my list is the Polar Vantage M2, which, actually didn't test the worst in GPS accuracy, but it didn't do fantastic either. It was off by about 170 meters over a 1,000-meter swim. But it's a watch that I don't think that you guys should really be considering now that Polar has some better options at that price or even lower price points. And I've always found this screen to be very dim, which makes it a little difficult to see where you are in an open water swim. Next on the list is the Polar Vantage V2, which again, another watch that might surprise people because the V2 is, it's a great triathlon watch. And if we were making a best triathlon watch ranking video, this list might look very different. But the GPS accuracy, really wasn't the best here on the Vantage V2. I was seeing anywhere from 130 to 190 meters off for that 1,000-meter swim test. Now the AmazFit T-Rex 2 is a watch that I've been testing. You might not be super familiar with it, but it's a very interesting budget GPS watch, and it does have triathlon functionality. If you check out this open water swim track, you're gonna kind of see right away why it's not at the top of the list here. But still, this watch, is very reasonably priced at $230, and it gets you pretty close as far as open water swimming goes, and you might want to consider it. Now, Coros has a few watches that can do open water swim tracking, and I haven't tested all of them, but generally speaking, they haven't tested all that well. The Vertix 2, with its multi-band GPS, is still a pretty bad performer as far as GPS tracking goes. And I tested this watch a few times, and this is one of those weird situations where it shows pretty bad tracking data and then somehow happens to get the total distance pretty close. I would say it's like just using the power of luck. But this watch, does make up for some of those GPS tracking issues with battery life. It'll go up to, something like 135 hours in standard GPS mode. So, depending on you and what kind of crazy, insane, ultra long open water swim you're doing, this one might be worth the trade-offs there. Okay, next is the Polar Grit X Pro, and I guess we could put the Grit X in here as well. And the GPS tracking has been better for me than some of the other Polar watches that I've tested, and the battery life is actually pretty good on this watch as well. So, while this watch is, kind of towards the bottom of the list still, I will say that it kind of falls in line with, expecting somewhere along the lines of, 10 to 15% error rate with its GPS tracking. And then interestingly, also from Polar, the Polar Pacer Pro actually tested a little bit more accurately than the Grit X Pro. So, depending on your exact needs, you might be able to save a little bit of money going with something like this Pacer Pro and still stay within that excellent Polar ecosystem. And then the Wahoo Elemnt Rival isn't the most accurate GPS tracking device on this list. I'm ranking it here at about 8th if you're kind of keeping track of the numbers here. But they've always been improving this watch, and their triathlon auto detection of splits is actually pretty interesting. Again, as we rank these, we also need to think about battery life. Some of you open water swimmers are absolutely bonkers. I know some of you guys that swim 10K and further, but the battery life on the Wahoo is, I'd say okay, but not great. And then this is a bit unexpected, but I have the Polar Pacer here at 7th. So I think if you really want a true value open water swimming watch, the Pacer at $200 might be the way to go. And I think it's kind of crazy that this watch actually tested better than the Pacer Pro, but that's how it goes sometimes. I think this watch was about 120 meters off after a 1,000-meter swim. Now, I know I'm gonna get some flack for this, but I'm putting the Apple Watch here at number 6. You know, some people are gonna suggest that it should be higher, and definitely a lot of people are gonna suggest that it would be lower. But the GPS is definitely hit or miss for me with this watch. But when it's good, it's really good. And then there's actually some new features that I've been using kind of as part of the beta operating system that do make it a very interesting triathlon option. But you know, I do want to be clear about this watch. If you need, you know, any sort of long battery life, then this is an absolute skip. And in 5th place, I have the Garmin Forerunner 955, which, you know, you guys are probably thinking it should be higher, but it is a very fantastic option for people. It has great battery life, so it can go a little bit longer than something like a 255, which, you know, again, might be important for some of you guys that are doing long open water swims. And the 955 has a solar option, so, you know, you guys can go even further. It's $500 or $600 depending on the solar. And I think, you know, a lot of you guys would have that be my number 1 open water swim pick, but for some odd reason, I've been seeing, you know, really mixed results with this watch when it comes to GPS accuracy. I had this in multi-band GPS mode, and I'm getting some pretty crazy results. I know other people that have been testing this watch with less issues, so again, this is probably just a little bit of bad data that I'm getting. But that being said, I did test this multiple times, and it always seems to be coming up short on distance. I'll definitely continue to swim with this watch. It is kind of one of my favorite watches, and I'll definitely let you guys know in the comments what I figure out. Okay, currently you might be able to pick up the now kind of like discontinued Forerunner 745 from Garmin. The 745 has always been, you know, one of the best performing GPS tracking watches that I've tested. And I have been getting great GPS accuracy out of this watch, and the battery life is pretty decent as well. I'm a little hesitant to rank this watch, you know, 1st or 2nd or something like that, because it is an older watch from Garmin, and I just don't know how many updates it's gonna get in the future. But when I swam open water with this, it was consistently solid. In the rankings here, I've got it basically 2nd as far as distance and accuracy goes. I think it was only like 24 meters off over 1,000 meters. Now, there's a fair amount of Garmin watches up here at the top, and the Garmin Instinct 2 might be a really good choice if you want something that'll go really, really long as far as battery life goes, and you don't mind a lower resolution monochrome display. That watch cost $350, and I think it's a good value. And it really was one of the top watches as far as, you know, GPS accuracy and open water tracking that I tested. I think it ranked about 3rd as far as distance. And, you know, you can see here that it does kind of go a touch long on each of these turns, but it only ended up generating about, you know, 50 meters of extra swimming over this 1,000-meter swim. And here at 2nd, I am putting the Garmin Forerunner 255. And honestly, you know, I had some of the best GPS measured accuracy with this watch. I'm not sure why, but at $350, I think that this is a really, really great option for open water swimmers. But in 1st place, you know, I have both the Fenix 7 and the Epix. They're both kind of like the same watch for the most part, but the Fenix has a much longer battery life, whereas the Epix has a bright AMOLED screen that has better visibility. And for me, you know, if I am glancing at my watch, you know, underwater, I do much prefer the Epix just because the display is that much brighter, as opposed to kind of the more traditional transflective displays. But both of these watches have really good multi-band GPS tracking, meaning that they can connect to multiple satellites, which does take a hit on battery life, but it also increases accuracy. So that, coupled with really good antenna design, seems to be making for a very, very good open water tracking swimming watch. Now, I will leave links to all of these devices down in the description of this video, as well as kind of like the top pinned comment. If I can find it at the Dialed Cycling Lab, I will also try to find a discount code that'll go along with that watch. But here's where I could use some of your help. Let me know, about your own personal experiences with, any of these watches down in the comment section of this video. Have you guys had any weird experiences or weird results with these watches? Or, do you guys think that my rankings are ridiculous? I will say that, it has been really fun swimming with all of these watches over the past 2 or 3 months. And I think that I'm gonna make, something similar, just kind of talking about the top triathlon watches. So, be sure to subscribe, if that's something that you would be interested in. But either way, be sure to get out there, swim, bike, run, rinse, and then repeat it all over again. And we will see you guys on the next one.